From Microbe TV, this is Beyond the Noise, episode number 80, recorded on August 25, 2025. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and joining me today is your host, Dr. Paul Offit.
Hi, Vincent.
Number 80, it's a good number. Only 20 left till 100.
And then I'm coming up to the incubator, and we're going to do it in person.
Yeah, that would be great. Easy train trip. This is the video version of Paul's column on Substack called Beyond the Noise, Cutting to the Chase on Important Health Topics. Today we're going to discuss Paul's latest column called RFK Jr. is a one-trick pony. It's almost as good as science with a Z, Paul. Tell us what Dr. Havers, an epidemiologist at the CDC, presented about the impact of COVID-19 on children for the previous year.
So Fiona Havers is a CDC epidemiologist, was a veteran of about 13 years, and on April 15th of this year, 2025, she presented data about the impact of COVID on children over the previous year. And what she showed was that thousands of children were hospitalized. The number she gave was 4% of hospitalizations. Then she had previously shown that there were about 250,000 to 450,000 hospitalizations. So you can assume overall that that 4% represented at least thousands and thousands of children being hospitalized. She showed that 1 in 5 of those children who were hospitalized were admitted to the intensive care unit. She showed that most of those children who were admitted were less than 4, and that virtually all were unvaccinated, and half were previously healthy, which is important for what comes next. So half of the children who were hospitalized, many of whom were admitted to the intensive care unit, were previously healthy but unvaccinated.
And 6 weeks later, RFK Jr. made another announcement. What was that?
So at the end of May, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. with Marty Makary on his right, the commissioner of the FDA, and Jay Bhattacharya, the head of the NIH on his left, said in a 1-minute post on video that he was no longer recommending this vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine, for healthy young children.
I couldn't be more pleased to announce that as of today, the COVID vaccine for healthy children and healthy pregnant women has been removed from the CDC recommended immunization schedule.
What was the basis for that statement?
No idea. This was made behind closed doors. It was made unilaterally. He said that it was made with advice from other experts in health and human services with the National Institutes of Health, but he never had said who they were. When he was asked to provide references to explain why he would say something that was completely at variance with the data that were presented by his own agency, the CDC, he really didn't. He showed papers that were pretty much unrelated and didn't say anything about that. So I don't know why he did that, other than the obvious reason, which is that he has said that he thinks that, quote, COVID vaccines, the mRNA vaccines, were the deadliest vaccines ever made.
This is the deadliest vaccine ever made.
That he's had a 2-decade history of being anti-vaccine, and so this was a way of putting in place policy for his anti-vaccine activism.
He's also said that the COVID vaccines don't protect against respiratory tract disease, right?
That's right, even though Fiona Havers in her presentation to the CDC clearly showed that it could, and that certainly we knew that unvaccinated children were the ones who were getting admitted. And we know that the vaccine is effective. There have been, since that vaccine came out, for children starting in May of 2021, that was children at least over 12, you saw that the vaccine was effective. And then as months went by, and the vaccine by the end of the year was recommended for children 5 to 12, and then ultimately children less than 5, there clearly was efficacy in those who got the vaccine as compared to those who didn't.
Yet, isn't it correct that he and his family got COVID vaccines?
That's what he said. He said that they got vaccinated. Although he's also said that if he could go back in time, he wouldn't vaccinate his children with anything. He would pay anything not to vaccinate his own children.
You know, what would I do if I could go back in time and I could avoid giving my children the vaccines that I gave them? I would do anything for that. I would pay anything to be able to do that.
Oh, these are empty words, obviously. So it sounds like this proclamation, which he made in 1 minute, was not the recommendation of a committee of experts, correct?
Right. It was his own idea.
And the presence of Bhattacharya and
Makary,
thank you, was just meant to give support to his statement, right?
Right. You have the head of NIH, the head of FDA. The public will view that as an important recommendation, even though, near as I can tell, one man made it because he's an anti-vaccine activist.
Subsequently, the American Academy of Pediatrics weighed in. Now, what is the American Academy of Pediatrics?
So it's a professional society that represents pediatricians. It was born of really in the Depression when children were going hungry and being abused. It was born to really protect children, but it represents pediatricians throughout the country.
And what was their recommendation about COVID vaccines?
It was a clear black letter recommendation that children 6 to 23 months of age should receive a COVID vaccine unequivocally, assuming that they'd never been vaccinated before, assuming that they hadn't been actually infected before, that those children were at risk. The statement was very clear. COVID is a risk for young children, and that young children need to be vaccinated. So this was at variance, directly at variance, with what RFK Jr. had just said.
How does AAP make these recommendations? Does one person decide, or is it a committee?
So in the same way that the CDC has its advisory committee, or had its advisory committee, the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practice, the American Academy of Pediatrics also has its committee. It's called the Red Book Committee, but it's the formal name is the Committee of Infectious Diseases, and it too consists of many physicians who have an expertise in virology, immunology, statistics, epidemiology, who counsel patients for vaccine preventable disease, who've seen vaccine preventable disease. It's an expert committee in much the same way that the ACIP is an expert committee, or the FDA's Vaccine Advisory Committee is an expert committee.
What was RFK Jr.'s response to the AAP recommendations?
He said what he always says. He said, if you look on the AAP's website, you will see that there are companies that have supported these AAP's Friends of Children charities, which supports adolescent mental health, suicide prevention, and that therefore those committee members were deeply in the pocket of the pharmaceutical industry. I can't overstate how awful that kind of slander is. What he's saying is, he's saying these people, because they receive money from the pharmaceutical industry, which they don't, are therefore ignoring data on safety or ignoring data on efficacy because they're paid to do it. And that's a terrible thing to say about somebody. And frankly, a lot of the hate that you get, whether it's by hate mail or you're getting physical intimidation or you're shooting up the side of the CDC, is largely based on that. And you can see how people would think that way. If people really believe that these committees, the ACIP or the FDA Vaccine Advisory Committee, or in this case, the AAP Advisory Committee, is really deeply in the pocket of industry and doesn't care about you and is therefore putting vaccines out there that are unsafe or ineffective, you can see how that would make people angry. And anybody who is involved in this has at some point gotten hate mail or death threats. It's awful. And I think that he really, in many ways, fosters that.
So he called it a pay to play. Now, even if vaccine manufacturers make donations to this charity of AAP, that has nothing to do with the members of the committee, right?
No, none of those committee members receive money from the pharmaceutical industry. They can't, any more than the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices can receive money from industry, or the members of the FDA Vaccine Advisory Committee. I mean, you have to fill out these forms, these lengthy forms, making it very clear that you have no association with the industry. And if you do, if, for example, you're on a data safety monitoring board or you're a principal investigator on a grant, then you can't vote on that vaccine or any vaccine or product that company makes.
Isn't RFK Jr. the one who does pay to play, like donations to his nonprofit anti-vaccine company?
Sure. I mean, he was for since 2016 was the head of the Children's Health Defense, which paid him hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to represent the activity of or the interests of anti-vaccine groups. And the other thing, by the way, is there's a wonderful monograph out called by the Centers for Countering Digital Hate, and it's called The Disinformation Dozen. So it's the 12 people or groups who represent the most anti-vaccine information on the internet, primarily about 65% of that anti-vaccine misinformation. Who supports them? Alternative medicine industry. That's another industry. So he's got he blames big pharma, but he's arguably in the pocket of big alt med.
He also works for law firms that sue vaccine manufacturers, and he receives payment for that, correct?
Right, and he receives payments for referring people to law firms that sue. And at least according to what was presented at that second confirmation hearing, that he's received like $2.5 million over the last couple of years for these kinds of lawsuits or referrals. And when he was asked by Elizabeth Warren, will you at least promise not to sue vaccine makers, he said no.
I'm not going to agree to not sue drug companies or anybody.
That's his source of his income. And so the degree to which he makes vaccines more feared is only the degree to which it lines his own pocket.
I mean, whenever I support vaccines, which I do all the time, occasionally people say I'm a shill of Big Pharma, that I get paid. And I can tell you, I don't.
One trick pony. That's why the title. I mean, anytime any scientist or physician or professional group or medical society says something about in support of vaccines, that they're safe, that they're effective, that they're valuable, it's his immediate reaction. It's like a tick. He says, they're in the pocket of industry.
Is it possible, Paul, that scientists, doctors, public health officials, academic institutions, scientific journals, medical or professional societies have all been bribed to support vaccines?
No. And the reason they do what they do is because they're trying to do good, because they're trying to make this a better world for children and adults, a safer world, as distinct from personal injury lawyers.
What veiled threat did RFK Jr. make to those who counter the CDC recommendations like AAP?
Right. He said that they better beware that they are violating the 1986 Liability Act, specifically the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. That liability program is called the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act. It was passed in 1986. But it was an empty threat, because the way it works is that the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program essentially protects doctors and hospitals from lawsuits regarding vaccines, because you have to go through this program. You don't sue the doctor. You don't sue the hospital. If, for example, you have an untoward or adverse reaction to a vaccine, you go through this program. Now, the thing is COVID is not part of that program. The COVID vaccines are not part of the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. They're part of their own program called the PrEP program, which just stands for Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act. So it functions in the same way that the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program would. So you can't really sue doctors or hospitals for example, recommending this vaccine as the AAP recommends it. It was an empty threat.
Unfortunately, PrEP expires in, I think, 2029. So hopefully we get rid of him by then.
Right, and hopefully he doesn't get rid of that program before that.
So he could get rid of it, or Congress could get rid of it, correct?
It's possible.
Yeah. Now, won't it cause confusion if AAP and other medical societies differ in their recommendations from the CDC's?
Yes, it'll cause confusion. And I think at least there are still vaccines available for children. And the current CDC recommendation for children is shared clinical decision making. So a doctor could reasonably say, this vaccine is of value. Here's the data for why it's of value, and you should get it. So that I think children are still in pretty good shape. And I also think that insurance companies will cover it. So I don't think that's a problem. What worried me a little bit, the other thing he said when he stood up at the end of May and said that he was not recommending the vaccine for young children, he also said he wasn't recommending it for pregnant women. And now that is not a recommended vaccine on the CDC's schedule. So what now? You will have trouble as a pregnant woman getting this vaccine because it's not recommended by the CDC. Now, the other point, though, is the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, just like the AAP, has a black letter recommendation that this is a recommended vaccine, and they too have been dealing with insurance companies. And the sense is insurance companies will pay for that, but we'll see. And I think where you may have trouble as a pregnant woman is getting a pharmacist to give it. I think that would be problematic, but it would not be a problem if your doctor recommended, or if your doctor wrote you a prescription that you should get it.
When you have this kind of confusion, some people will be frightened and decide not to vaccinate. So if that's the case, then young children and pregnant women are going to suffer at the hands of RFK Jr.
And that will happen. I have no doubt when he stood up and he said that he didn't recommend, HHS, Health and Human Services, didn't recommend this vaccine for young children or pregnant women, that there will be young children or pregnant women who now won't get the vaccine for one reason or the other. And one of the reasons may be they think that he's right, that the vaccine's risks outweigh its benefits, which isn't true. The opposite is true. And so he's doing a lot of harm. And what changes this? When do people finally stand up and say, this is enough?
You put a good quote in your column towards the end about, who's going to rescue the children.
Right, it's an old W.H. Auden quote, which is, when all the mass and majesty of this world, when all that carried weight and always weighed the same lay in the hands of others, they were small and could not hope for help, and no help came. And that's what I feel like. Everything that we counted on as being important, like good scientific studies, now lays in the hands of others. And the others, in this case, an anti-vaccine propagandist named Robert F. Kennedy Jr. When will our children be saved?
Yeah, unfortunately, the people who are directly responsible for the children's health are the parents. And if they're confused, then we have a big problem.
Right, and most parents support vaccines. I mean, independent of one's political affiliations, most parents support vaccines. I think we get lost in that because I think what's happened is that 10%, that loud 10% that believe vaccines are doing more harm than good, have sort of now moved into the public policy realm.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate that all the health policy in this country now is run by people who don't believe in vaccines. And that's scary.
No, and it's not, as you know, it's not a belief system. It's an evidence-based system.
We'll put a link to this column in the show notes so you can read it up and see the links. It's Beyond the Noise with Dr. Paul Offit. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Vincent.